Everybody loves a homecoming. Just a great story in the world of sport, not even basketball, just sport. A story where a great player, even an average player, comes back home, finishes their career, finishes on a high, even if it doesn't involve a championship. And that's exactly what I'm hoping, and is kind of already happening with Damian Lillard and Chris Paul, just to name two of them. Let's talk about it. These are the stories in sport that really get my juices flowing. This is what I like to read about and see and just follow. Damian Lillard, back to Portland. Who would have predicted that? Whose bingo card was that on? Is that what they say? I think that's what they say. It was not on my bingo card. I'm not sure anyone had that on their bingo card. Then, a few days later, let's do another homecoming. Let's do another homecoming of sorts. Chris Paul back to the Clippers, where... Look, those were his prime years. That was sort of where he was the best Chris Paul we know. It was Lob City. It was all that stuff that people were like, this is awesome. This is Chris Paul at his best. Then he kind of went on to, being a more veteran of a team. I will say, and this fits nicely into the whole landscape of this episode, Chris Paul for the last however many years is the one guy that I'm always rooting for to have playoff success. I don't know why. It's just he's been around a long time. He's the point guard. He has respect all around the league, but the championship is the one thing he has not been able to get. And it's also the fact that injuries have played a role in that. Was it the Houston series? They were looking awesome against Houston because he did play for Rockets. It was the Clipper series against Houston, I'm pretty sure. But they were doing so well, and he tore that hammy, or he stretched that hammy again. And then Clippers just didn't have a shot. Maybe I'm mixing that up. It's actually funny. Maybe he was actually playing for Houston. But anyway, I 100% know that was the storyline. I just can't remember which bloody jersey he was wearing because he's worn a lot of them. But regardless, now wherever he goes, I'm kind of rooting for him. So these homecomings are really cool stories to me. But forget Chris Paul. Let's talk about Damian Lillard. Let's just think about his career as a whole. I'm going to go through it. 6th overall pick back in Portland, 2012. That was a while ago, 13 years ago. Rookie of the Year straight away in 2012. That was 19 points a game, 6.5 assists. Always nice to look back on the stats just to, put it into comparison to maybe some other Rookie of the Years. 11 years in Portland. Multiple All-Stars, multiple clutch moments that kind of earned him the Dame Time nickname. He came into the scene. He was a star. He was one of the best point guards in the league. He was super likable, which fits into the Damian Lillard narrative and is almost my favorite part about Damian Lillard, if I'm honest with you. His likability. To me, I would have said he's the most likable player in the league and has been for a while. There's just something about him. I'd happy to elaborate on that a bit more, but I won't. 11 years in Portland. Him and CJ McCollum, that was the backcourt for years. That was just who Portland was. That was who the Blazers were when you thought of them. McCollum leaves. People are always talking about when it's time for Dame to leave. And I'm not sure about the years in between those two leaving each other, but it wasn't that long. But people are always like, you know what? When is it Lillard's turn? When is it time for him to do what people think he should be doing or should have done a few years ago? And that is to go to a different team to try to get a championship. Some people, you get drafted to a team, you stay there for many amount of years, and people just want to see you find success if you don't find it there. That's exactly what happened with Lillard. They were just like, I think it's time for him to move on. So you get to 2023. He was like, you know what? I agree. It is time for me to move on. Requested a trade. Ended up in Milwaukee. Didn't work out that well. I was pretty high on that team. Like, I reckon there was 1 year or 2 years, or he was only there for 2 years, I think. But there was 1 year where I was like, if people were to ask me if a team put it all together, who are your championship favorites? I think I just said Milwaukee. I really like Giannis, still at the peak of his powers. Dame, he wasn't the same Dame, but I had faith he could put it together. For whatever reason, I just had faith. Chris Middleton, a few other pieces, Brook Lopez. I just could see those guys coming up big in the playoffs and doing really well. It wasn't to be. They didn't even come close. But in theory, I could see why people might be high in Milwaukee. But it just wasn't. It wasn't time for them. It wasn't right for Dame. Like, injuries got in the way. You forget about that blood clot early last year, early 2025. That kept him out for a bit. Obviously, those health concerns, things like that are pretty scary. Pretty full on. And then, of course, everyone knows that he eventually tore his Achilles in the playoffs 2025 last year, which was just devastating. Hate to use that word to sound so dramatic, but especially for such a likable character like Dame is, just sucks. Sucked to see. But then you get to now. I would guarantee that 99% of people would have expected him to sign with a different contender. Just a contender where he can rehab, stay there, and just once he gets back, that is a clear, defining, contending team. People mention Boston. You can rehab with Jason Tatum. You can, some other teams that maybe they're set up. Cleveland. Just, it doesn't really make sense with Garland or Donovan, but I'm just trying to say teams that would still be up there. I don't think anyone had on their cards that he'd come back to Portland, where it all began, his home. It was just very refreshing to see that notification pop up on my phone and just to look at the reaction about people seem to love Damian Lillard just as much as I do, really. Like, it's just like, man, I love this story. I did not expect it, but it's awesome. He gets to rehab there. He gets to call a place he probably always called home again, officially, on unofficial terms after signing the papers to return back to Portland. And I just think it's one of those awesome stories of sport. Of course, when you talk about homecomings, it's hard not to talk about LeBron going back to Cleveland in whatever year it was. That was like the peak of the peak in this type of element for me, because I still remember him standing on that sort of press conference stage, not a traditional press conference, but it was just like a concert stage almost, and him just saying, like, the people of Akron, I'm home, I'm back. I just have that voice ringing in my head, how he said that. And I'm going to do myself a favor and probably look at that after this, because the way he spoke in the speech to all the fans just kind of sent shivers down your spine. I don't know if that's just me as a sport fan loving that shit, but I think it's just awesome. Those stories, him returning, was one of those moments where I was just like, this is poetic. And Dame is a little bit of that. It's not as much of that, but it's pretty damn close, because look, LeBron was the guy is the GOAT for many. Dame's one of the all-time greats. But I think there's something nice about this, because LeBron returned, and anywhere LeBron went, you could kind of say he's like a championship contender. But Portland are not going to be a championship contender in 2 years when Dame comes back. So it's refreshing to see a star with this attitude. And again, this is why I really like Dame. He just seems like he's got a different switch in his head of his compared to a lot of stars. He's wired differently to me. He's all about loyalty, legacy, maybe not ring chasing. I'm sure he'd love one. I'm sure that. But maybe he's saying to himself, you know what? After these injuries, after me trialing going away from Portland, maybe comfort, maybe home, maybe my family staying put in a place they know. Maybe that stuff is a hell of a lot more important at this stage in his career, at this health in his career. Maybe that's more important than rings. And I love that. I think it's a super likable choice. And I'm glad Portland welcomed him back, because I think they didn't leave on great terms. But you kind of mend those things. You probably say it's a business side of sport. And I'm glad both of those sides of the parties could just be like, hey, you're coming back. Like, come back home. One of the just an awesome story in sport. Love it. There's probably not a player I'd be rooting for more once he returns than Dame. To win a ring, to find success. Actually, not even to win a ring, just to be a version of Damian Lillard that he's happy with, that he's satisfied with. Even a version like the old Dame, the prime Dame. I think it's awesome. Let's talk about Chris Paul. People have already said that this is his last season. I don't know if he's officially said it. He may have. There's something that some interview that popped up with Taylor Rooks from ESPN or wherever she is now. But there was something that popped up that where Chris Paul may have actually said to her, this is my last season. But let's do a similar thing that I did with Dame. 4th overall pick in 2005 was Chris Paul. Rookie of the year. This is similar pathways. Like, you're a stud point guard that comes onto the scene. You do not disappoint. You get Rookie of the year. You're laughing. He didn't spend 11 seasons in that organization. He spent 6 seasons. And just listen, I was having a really good time of looking how many jerseys and locations Chris Paul had been through and had been to and had worn. 6 seasons in New Orleans, 6 seasons in Los Angeles, Clippers, 2 in Houston, 1 in OKC, 3 in Phoenix, 1 in Golden State. Last year, 1 in San Antonio. Now we're back to the Clippers. Another great story. It's a home of sorts. I think it's because this one feels nice because if you think of Chris Paul, you do probably think about those Clipper days. Those were his prime days, the Lob City days, the Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, Eric Gordon. I'm going to throw him in there as well. Some other names. Here's another name. I don't know. Zach Randolph was there. That was probably ages ago. That was ages ago because he played against Clippers versus Grizzlies was a classic thing back then. So that's not it. But anyway, people knew Chris Paul from the Clippers. That is what I'm trying to say. So for him to return for his potential / factual last season is an awesome story. And again, I really like the poetic nature of it. His is different because it's not the team that drafted him, but it's a team where he kind of was at his prime, as I said, and it's probably a great opportunity for him to actually win a championship. So now he's back at the Clippers. This man is 40 years old. Let's just make that clear. 40 years old, 20 seasons in the NBA. This will be his 21st and last season in the NBA, reportedly. And I just think that's a hell of a story. To come back, to do that, there has to be a sense of poetic justice or sense of storyline for a lot of these things, for even harsh organizations or coaches and like the business side of sports. There has to be a human side where it's like, I know you want to come back. I know this would make you and your family happy. So let's work on a deal. And I love that. And clearly, people can put things aside for things like that. Maybe the person and the human nature of it is above business sometimes and above the championship stuff. And yes, of course, I have no doubt that Portland are doing it to help their organization on court, even though it's kind of a weird fit, you would think. And I'm sure Chris Paul going to Clippers is that just makes sense. You're a team, you have all these pieces, you have like the amount of superstars that are there now in terms of like Harden, Kawhi, Bradley Beal. You kind of just forget about these moves, but you add Chris Paul. I think he will still play a bit at 40 years old. He's proven that as long as he doesn't get another injury, as long as the injury doesn't plague him once again, he'll be good. I think he'll be great for them. Even if he's just a locker room presence and a guy that can come on a few minutes here and there, command the floor, do what he does, but just know that he's 40 years old. So he's probably not going to have a massive role, you would think. But the way LeBron and Steph and KD are still playing this, like at this age, is pretty crazy. And they're kind of setting a new standard. So maybe he will. I don't know. Maybe he'll start for him. That's not going to happen. Regardless, these two are going to be the most, probably the two most players I will be rooting for once they play. Obviously, Chris Paul, actually it's season by season. Chris Paul, be rooting for you, getting that championship. Not sure I've ever rooted for Clippers to get a championship before, but I will be now. Hopefully they can actually have a good year because I feel like they're always that team that's like, hey, we look great on paper, but boy, we are not going to execute to our full potential. So I hope that's the case purely for one man, being Chris Paul. And then the year after is Damian Lillard. He'll come back. I don't know what the hell Portland will be. I don't know what their young core will be, but I'll be rooting for him just to return to some level of old Dame and just to have a healthy season. Anyway, the storylines of sport. That's what I really love talking about, and just like, thinking about the narratives and what it actually means beyond just playing basketball and putting that orange ball in the hoop. But that's a wrap. Great stories.